Hey HSM, it's good to be with you as we wrap up 2020 tonight, wrapping up our Christmas series, Merry Christmas to Me, with the final episode of HSM of the year. We're back on campus with Worship for Everyone on January the 10th, so stay safe and healthy, and hopefully we can get this COVID stuff to start ramping down permanently soon, so we can start meeting in homes again and in person again without masks and all that kind of stuff. One thing I want to remind you of is to make sure and sign up for Summerfest so that you get the early bird discount, which expires at the end of December. You can click the link in our Instagram bio, or you can go to pvstudents.camp. It has all kinds of stuff there. June 13th through 17th, and I promise you that the worship and the times together are going to be epic. So as we get started, just a quick recap of what our Christmas series has been talking about. The foundation behind the idea is that we think about Christmas and often use the filter of whether Christmas is a good one or a bad one based on how our own personal experience was. In a few weeks, when you and I, when we think about Christmas in hindsight, is it going to be about the gift that we received or the experiences that we had? I mean, one of the things that makes Christmas like no other time of the year is the fact that it isn't about us at all. It's about God entering human history by putting skin on and entering into humanity. So to start this off, we talked about how Mary and Joseph gave up their comfort on that very first Christmas. While you and I might have visions of fireplaces and fuzzy blankets and hot chocolate and all those kind of things on the first Christmas, for them it was probably smelly and inconvenient and probably a little lonely. Definitely not a night at the Westin for Mary and Joseph, but they knew that being the parents of the Messiah would have them do things that they never thought about doing, and they chose to be obedient to God over staying comfortable. Now last week, Caleb shared with you about the shepherds and how the announcement of Jesus' birth interrupted their stories. The lowly shepherds by themselves at night, watching over their flock, were amazed by the announcement by the angels. They went to see it for themselves, but that wasn't the end. They ended up sharing their stories with other people. The story of the incarnation of Jesus, so that he would be the lamb that takes away the sin of those that surrender to him, that's a story worth telling to everyone. And you and I have been on the receiving end of hearing about Jesus so that we can be on the telling end of that as well. So, as we wrap up, there's another character in the nativity scene, or characters, the wise men or the magi. And what is it that they gave on that Christmas? We know from the story that they brought different gifts. So that got me thinking about, what if we were the wise men? What would we bring to Jesus? So let's pause for just a moment and let you talk about this in your group and have a little fun with this discussion. But talk about, what would you have brought to Jesus? What would the gift have been that you brought to Jesus? So talk about that for just a minute. We will talk about the significance of the gifts that Jesus received in just a minute, but I want us to look at Matthew chapter 2 and starting in verse 1 to see who these guys really were. Okay, so Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star that's rising and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Christ would be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they told him, because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. Then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. So that's important, as we're going to get to here a little bit later, because he's trying to time this, Herod is, because he wants to eliminate any threats to him. So there are a lot of things that we don't know about the wise men, right? I mean, for instance, we don't know how many of them came to visit Jesus. Probably more than 3. We don't know their names, ages, or really any biographical type of information about where they came from. We don't even know how they learned about the star. But what we do know is important to note, though. For instance, we know that they were scholars. Based on their studies, they understood that a king was going to be born and that king was going to change everything. They somehow knew how to find Jesus. And we know that they followed a star and traveled literally thousands of miles just to see him and to worship him. And with that, they brought some extraordinary gifts. I mean, very expensive gifts. These magi were important. They were wealthy. They were intelligent. But when they learned that this new king was born, they left their positions behind to go and honor him. Unlike King Herod, who I mentioned earlier, who responded to the news with hate and fear and a desire to kill, the wise men instead responded to this new king with worship. So what is it that did they bring, and why was it significant? So let's go back and pick up in Matthew chapter 2, looking in verse 11. And it says, entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In verse 12, and being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. Now, have you ever been to a baby shower? I don't think I've ever seen these type of gifts opened up at a baby shower. I mean, what do they mean? Is there some symbolism here that we need to know about? Because not only were these gifts valuable and expensive, but they really were symbolic. For instance, the first gift of gold. I mean, gold definitely is a gift worthy for a king, right? It's the most precious and valuable metal. The second one, frankincense. Frankincense is a resin, kind of like a tree sap taken from a special kind of tree, a boswellia tree. I mean, it was used in making perfumes and even had some medicinal uses as well. But even more importantly, it was a gift that you would give to a deity. In other words, frankincense was a gift for a god, in this case, the only god. And then finally, myrrh. Myrrh is kind of like frankincense in that it's a plant resin from a different plant. It's also used in perfumes, but the significance is that it was often used to prepare a body for burial. It was a strange gift for a baby because myrrh was a gift that symbolized death. So through their gifts, the wise men were saying, you are our king, you are our God, and we know you'll one day die to save us. Now, they were much more than just gifts, though. They were an act of worship. On the first Christmas, the wise men gave their worship. So we have, in week 1, we have Mary and Joseph giving their comfort. Last week, the shepherds giving their stories. And tonight, the wise men giving their worship. They're all examples of sacrifice, but nothing compared to what God gave. Because on the first Christmas, God gave everything, right? God chose to do this. He chose to humble himself. He chose to enter the world that he created. He chose to constrain himself in a human body. And he chose to begin a life that he knew would be brief and would end in an extraordinarily gruesome death. Now, Jesus' birth wasn't a backup plan. I mean, this was God's original plan to rescue humanity. He gave. Now, I'm guessing that you know and maybe have memorized John chapter 3, verse 16, right? You see this all the times. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. Now, God loved so much that he gave. But do you know the next verse? John 3, 17. Because it says, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Jesus came to earth, putting on the skin of humanity, and he launched the greatest rescue mission in the history of this planet. Why? Because God loves. So, as we think about the beginning of this rescue mission, and we celebrate that this time of year, there is a greater story that we can be a part of. It's the story of redemption, the story of this life not being about us, but about the one who created us and redeemed us. The story of pain and suffering alongside the story of grace and joy. The greatest story of all, and it all begins with the gift of Jesus on the first Christmas. So, here's my question for you. What will you do with the gift of Jesus? Have you truly surrendered to him? He came not to condemn and judge, but to rescue and to redeem. There's no greater thing that you can do this Christmas than surrender your life to him. And I think that your group leader can answer any questions that you have on that, or feel free to reach out to us in any other way. And so I'll just close by saying this simply. Merry Christmas, HSM. We'll see you after the new year.